So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. If you don't know, my name is Nick. I manage the Office of University Outreach's Innovation Incubator, which provides no-cost business counseling and webinars such as this to the campus as well as the community. If you'd like to learn more information about our services, you can visit our website at go.umflint/IN. And I'll say that again at the end if anybody has any interest. So thank you again for joining us and welcome to Opportunities in International Business. As you can see from the title slide, this workshop is focused on both the science of international business as well as some of the practical skills such as identifying real opportunities to help your company's bottom line grow. We're very excited to have our speaker today and very lucky. We have Dr. Kandogan joining us, Professor of International Business and Associate Dean from the School of Management. I'll just do a quick bio, although I could spend a lot of time. He's got a lot of laurels. Professor Kandogan is a Professor of International Business Associate Dean. He's published in many journals, including the Journal of International Business Studies, the Journal of World Business, the International Business Review, Review of International Economics, and many others, as well as a faculty associate at the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies in Ann Arbor, and a frequent contributor to the William Davidson Institute Working Paper Series of the Ross Business School at the University of Michigan. Just let everybody know our session will be recorded and be posted on our website in the coming days. So in case you miss anything or have to leave, you can still catch the full presentation. And we just ask that you remain muted during the presentation so there's no background noise. Unless you have a question, if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and the professor will take your question at that time. With that, I'd like to hand it off to Professor Jenner.
Thanks, Nick. I do teach an international business class. This is basically a very, very shortened version of this. Basically, the class is about identifying international business opportunities. And so I'm not going to get into the logistics of doing international business because you do get a lot of, there are a lot of formalities behind it. But the essence is basically, where do we find good business opportunities? And there is globalization that has been benefiting a lot of companies. It's not just large companies, but also small companies have been benefiting due to technological advancement. And globalization is actually has two main parts. One is globalization of markets, which is basically you are able to sell in multiples of markets. What you produce or service is not just limited to the U.S. consumers, but also other consumers in other countries. Also, you don't have to make the whole production process within one country. You can, dissect it to different parts and take it to different regions of the world that offer, favorable factor costs. So there are multiples of benefits to companies, small and large. And what I want to do is to basically go over the essentials of, how to identify the best location and evaluate different locations. So there are actually main couple questions that you need to answer when we are exploring different international markets. One is which market to enter, when to enter, and at what scale to enter. It seems like three different questions, but as you're going to see, this is only one question. And the reason for that is, as you are trying to answer these questions, basically, you are answering the other ones. One thing that we're going to be looking for when we are identifying different international markets is consistency. Consistency is in our choices with regard to scale of entry, which market we're entering, whether we are trying to enter before or after our competitors, as well as the mode of entry. So we are going to try to do the best, we're going to come up with the best solution, and we are going to try to make consistent decisions. And we always need to be cognizant of basically the disadvantages of our choices and try to do something about those things. So with regard to the first question, which market, when, and what scale, one thing that you have to determine is what is the most important thing for you. Suppose you want to enter into the Indian market, then the answer for the other questions have been answered. Or you're looking for a market where you can enter at the large scale, then the answer for the other two questions have already been answered. Or you want to be the first mover or enter after your competitors have entered, then the which market and what scale questions have been answered. So you need to decide on what is most critical thing with regard to your the first question over here, whether it's the market, whether your position with regard to your competitors, or the scale of the entry. The second very important question is basically the mode of entry. And we basically have three main modes of entry. One is exporting, the other one is licensing, and the third one is foreign direct investment. But we decompose this to different options because you can export not only the final goods and services, but you can also export your technology, which we call turnkey. The licensing could take the form of franchising depending on the sector that you're entering. If you're in the service sector, that's going to be franchising. But if you're in the manufacturing sector, that's going to be called licensing. So we're going to go over those because there are a lot of similarities between the two. And the last one is the foreign direct investment. And you're going to see that this is the most expensive and the most risky way of entering. But when you look at the advantages and disadvantages of these modes of entry, you will see that because of all these things, most of the companies end up actually doing foreign direct investment. They choose the most risky and most expensive way of entering into different markets. This also takes different forms depending on how much control you want to have in the final venture. It could be a joint venture where you basically create a company with a local company over there, and you're going to see that that offers a lot of advantages. And it's typically chosen as the initial way of entering into a foreign market. But later on, the disadvantages will amount, and then you will have to move to wholly owned subsidiary where you don't have a partner and you own the whole facility. And there's also the choice of whether you are going to be acquiring an existing company or start a new company is in greenfield. And in each one of them, there are a number of factors that we need to take into account. There are a lot of pros and cons. And for example, like for the exporting option, when you're exporting, you're transporting it to a different country. So you certainly need to take into account the transportation costs. And the goods and services are crossing the border, so they're going to be subject to government intervention in forms of trade barriers. So you may have to pay for tariffs and all other costs associated with crossing your goods and services across the border. When you have a longer term presence in another market, risks are going to be critical. So you really have to be careful about the political risks, economic risks involved. And overall, for each mode of entry, cost of production is going to be important. You need to identify a location that is the best location in terms of factor costs, the input costs in your production process. So let's have a look at the first question, one of the parts of the first question, which is the which market. And the essence of the answer is basically this: long-term profit potential. We're trying to make money, so the profit is what we care about, and that has two parts to it: the revenues, how big the market is, and the cost of producing in a particular country. And we're not necessarily looking for the actual profits because we're just looking at the potential. And the reason for that is because oftentimes the best opportunities are in emerging markets, and emerging markets, they're emerging, which means that the potential is there, but you may not be able to realize that potential immediately. Having presence over there for a long period of time is going to allow you to learn about that market and eventually reach out to that potential. So what are some of the factors that we would consider in assessing this long-run profit potential? One is the size of the market, how big the market is. So you obviously need to look at the demographics. The most simple method of measure of this is basically looking at the population size. Larger countries obviously have larger markets. But of course, you are not catering. I mean, it's possible that you're not catering to the whole consumers over there. So you may want to look at the maybe the middle class. Oftentimes companies that are selling products that appeal to the consumer markets, they look for the middle class, because middle class is basically a class that has an income level that meets their necessities, and they have excess money, and they typically look for an improvement in the quality of their life. That's why they would be drawn into products and services coming from developed countries like the United States. And another factor that you need to take into account is the affordability, the income, the present wealth of the consumers. You should be looking at the purchasing power, and a measure of that is obviously income level, which is the gross domestic product per person, per capita income. And this is especially important when you have chosen the exporting option, because exporting means that you're exporting this year. So what is their current level of affordability? But you need to, when you're looking at the per capita income, you need to be cautious about the income distribution. A lot of countries, they have high per capita income because the income, there's high income inequality. That means that there's a very rich class, but not much of a middle class. So if your product appeals to middle class, basically you won't be successful in that market, because the rich class is not going to be interested in your product either. So that could be a little bit deceiving. And we're looking for the long-run profit potential. So your presence over there is not just limited to how much people can afford this year in terms of income, but also in the future. So economic growth rate is also another factor that you need to take into account. Obviously, developing countries having lower levels of income are growing faster than the developed countries, which have a typical growth rate of 2 to 3%. So that's why a lot of the international business involves developing countries, because they do offer this high profit potential in the long run. I have listed a data source over here if you're interested in finding about these factors. This is the National Accounts Main Aggregates database. And I can just quickly click on it to show you. You can get data on income, the population, economic growth rates from this. So basically, you just need to select on the country you are interested in. Let's suppose that we want to enter into, we're exploring the Egyptian market, and let's put the 2018 as the most recent data. And then from here, you can choose whatever you're interested. So if you're interested in this overall size of the market, you could be looking at the GDP at current prices in US dollars. Just make sure that you don't click on the national currency, because we don't know what the exchange rate is. So this will give you an idea about at the current prices, what their size of their economy is. Another factor that you can look is the GDP per capita in US dollars. Again, this is the income level. And let me see, at the bottom, you have an idea about the population. And then this one, GDP annual rate of growth, will give you about some data on the growth rates. Is there a question?
What was the website?
This is the
website?
National Accounts Main Aggregates. So if you actually Google, you will be able to get this data set. It's free to everybody, so you should have an access to it. Michael?
Yeah, do you know if that website, do they offer APIs that I could plug into a different website?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so that's a tech question. I'll have to get a hold of them for. Sorry.
Okay, I am not sure what API is.
So basically, it's the website's here. I get an API that I can plug my website into to track all this data or run some machine learning on it, so that we can, I don't know, predict or measure market trends in real time.
Okay, you may want to check that with them, Michael.
All right.
Lorna, you had a question?
Yes. Will you be sharing with us this presentation?
Yeah, I can send it to the innovation, the center, and then Nick, maybe you can share it with you probably have some contact information of the attendees.
Yep, we can go ahead and send out to everybody. If I think everyone registered. If you didn't, just shoot me a quick email or put it in the chat to me.
Great, thank you.
Will we have an opportunity at the end of this, or at some point during this workshop, to discuss maybe which markets you or have shown scalability and future growth? I mean, considering places like NEOM, Saudi Arabia, places in Africa, countries like China. I would love to, to hear everyone in the workshop, what business they have or haven't already done with these countries, because I think it's great, and that's why I'm here. But yeah, I know you have a lot of stuff, so I don't want to intrude.
Well, let's do that. Like once I'm done with the presentation, maybe everybody could talk about their international experiences, and you will be able to connect with each other and help out each other too. Okay. Another important factor that we need to take into account when we are assessing long-run profit potential is basically the cost and risk associated with countries. There are certainly some countries that you should stay away, and because they are pretty much unstable countries, and we're looking for both economic and political stability. And political stability, you know, we're not necessarily looking for democratic countries which tend to be stable, but also some authoritarian countries have also been very stable. When you look at Russia, for example, it's not quite democratic country, but the same leadership means that the same rules apply, and you can, you know, have a lot of profit opportunities in countries such as this. So political stability is one thing that we're looking for. Like, again, it doesn't have to be a democratic country, but they are much more stable than the other countries. And we're also looking for economic stability. And one very important condition is market systems, whether they have a market economy or not. And that's how China, basically being a country which is not democratic, so there are some questions over there with regard to their politics, but they have been a capitalist country for a very long time. That's why there are a lot of opportunities and which are realized by lots of companies in countries that have market systems. So part of that economic stability is that they have a market economy. Another one, market economies could be unstable too if they have a very high inflation. Inflation, basically, price levels are increasing. There's a lot of uncertainty, and you know, countries that have high inflation, you should stay away from them because there is a lot of risks involved in high inflation countries. Another factor that may lead to a financial crisis other than inflation is the private sector debt. And, you know, we can think about, for example, Italy, that is a democratic nation, has a market economy, but they have a very large private sector debt that causes some issues with regard to that, you know, country, doing international business in that country. And we haven't had any, you know, major financial crisis arising from Italy, but when you look at the country right next door, Greece, over time, especially when you're considering the long run, those pressures have led to financial crisis and led to the situation which is very high unemployment and economic instability, which, you know, deters people from doing international business in those countries. So I have over here a few data sources for each one of these, whether, you know, the economic system of various countries, the political system of the countries, and the inflation, if you're interested in looking at the basically the economic and political stability. Just going to quickly click on these. This is Heritage Foundation, and they have been assessing countries. Oh boy, it's Heritage Foundation. There we go. I love this heat map because, you know, it gives you an idea about, you know, in terms of different factors involved in assessing economic freedom in a country, how the countries are rated. This is the overall basically economic freedom. And when a country has a high score, basically means that they have a lot more economic freedom. So the green countries, you see, like the Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, Northern European countries, and in comparison to, you know, Southern European countries and North America and Chile, basically, are economically most free. So the economically most free countries are somewhere over here, basically those small countries of, you know, Singapore and Hong Kong. But you can also dig deeper into this by not just looking at the overall score, but also the individual elements of the score. For example, if you're going to have some investments, you want to make sure that your property rights are well observed. And, you know, when you see some red countries over here, that means that you should definitely stay away from those countries because you don't have as much property right as you think. And the property rights could be infringed basically because of high taxes too. So that's something that you need to take into account. Property rights are basically the rights that you have over how you are going to be using a certain resource and how you're going to keep the income that results from that resource. So if there's heavy taxation, heavy licensing fees of that, or things of that nature, that means that your property rights are not as well regarded. And you can see that some similar countries that we have observed in overall score tend to be doing better here. Judicial effectiveness, the majority of the world is basically, a red country. Government integrity, nearly the whole world here. The tax burden, this seems good, but it seems like a lot of the things have been reversed over here. The countries that had really good overall economic freedom, some of the Northern European countries, because of the heavy taxation, they turn into red. Government spending, obviously, this wasn't always the case in Europe, but they're having an economic trouble, so they have been having budget deficits. The fiscal health of the country, business freedom is very important, and I'm glad to see that most of the countries are green over here. The thing that I like a lot over here is the trade freedom. The whole world is nearly open to trade, investment freedom and financial freedom. And you can actually click on each one of these countries that you may be interested and get some more information on these. So this is the economic freedom, and for political freedom, the Freedom House provides data, and basically, again, a map over here, heat map. The green countries are politically free, the red countries are not politically free, and then the yellow, orange countries are basically somewhat free countries. And you can also, change the year over here to this is the for year 2020, and you can see how countries have been evolving over time. And there's like a democracy status over here too. So how countries are changing over the years. And then the last one is basically World Bank data on inflation. And this is fairly similar to that first database that I've shown you. And it will show you the inflation rates. All right, my links are not working today. So I can type in here inflation, consumer prices annual. So you can, choose the consumer price index or the consumer prices, and this is just for the United Arab Emirates, but you can change the country and then pick another one, and that will show you how the inflation rates have been changing over time for a particular country. I believe this is the whole world. All right, so what we're looking for is basically low inflation rate country. All right, the last part of this question, which market is maybe the most important one, and that is the question that we need to answer is how much value we are creating when we move into another country. Are we getting into a country that offers substitutes? Maybe you are going to get into, fierce price competition when you get into a country like that. Or are you really solving a problem that this country has? So you are offering a suggestion to this country. They do have an unmet demand, and they will be, you will be able to satisfy that demand. If you are in a situation like that, if you're really creating a lot of value in that particular market, basically you will be able to make a lot more profit, because greater value basically means higher prices that you can charge. So the question over here is basically how suitable is your product to that particular market? And sometimes obviously you may need to customize your product a little bit, especially if it's not, it's the cultural differences or language differences would dictate or not. So here, whereas while this website does not necessarily give you an idea about the value the business can create, the Global Edge is a very widely used data source coming from Michigan State University, and they do have a lot of information on various countries and sectors, different sectors in various countries. So I would highly recommend that you do analyze this All right, nothing is, let me just remove the end. All right, global edge. And you can look at the various countries and do an analysis on their countries. So there could be, you could be looking at it by country, or if you're specifically looking for an industry, it will give you a comparison of the countries for an industry, or it would give you comparisons across industries for a particular country. It's a great resource for doing some analysis on a specific sector in a particular country, and that will give you an idea about the value that you will be generating as you get into a particular country, and has a lot more tools and data over here that will help you with the identification of a market. So the second part of this question is when, and when is basically the timing of the entry. And it's not like this quarter, next year, or anything like that. It's more about the relative to your competitors. Are you trying to be a first mover in one country? So you are bringing in something new to that country, a new product, a new service, or are you entering after your competitors have entered? So you are basically a later entrant. And the only benefit to late entering into a country is basically to observe and learn from the mistakes of your previous movers. You're getting into a foreign country, there's a lot of pioneering costs associated with that. You're entering into a country that has a different system, so you need to spend a lot of time and effort to learn about the system over there. And this is especially a disadvantage for developing countries, because in developing countries, the systems are not in place there for a long period of time. So they tend to change a lot. So there is a diminishing value in learning about the different business systems when you are getting into a developing country. But in developed countries, they're more stable. The systems are more stable. You could run into some business failure due to ignorance that you are in a foreign environment. Customers are different over there. The cultures are different. The language are different. And if you ignore the fact that you're in a foreign country, you may also run into difficulties of being a first entrant over there. And since you are a first entrant, there are a lot of costs associated with promoting and establishing your product. You need to educate the customers that they really need the service, they really need this product. And especially if the customers are not familiar with your product, these could really be significant. Obviously, these are not the kind of problems that a late entrant is going to be facing, because a first mover has already educated the customers, so you don't have to bear those things. So in the options, basically, advantages of one becomes disadvantages of the other one. Typically, we would recommend, which is not always feasible, that you are entering into a country as a first mover, because first mover gives you quite a good chance for establishing a brand name and creating switching costs. I am originally from Turkey, and the first computer company that entered into Turkey was IBM. And for a very long time, computers, we used to call them IBM. IBM meant computer. So even though we were buying some other brand computers, we all called them IBM. So you really get a very strong brand name association as you are entering into a country as a first mover. You can also create, or you should try to create, some switching costs. Switching costs are costs that the customers have to bear as they switch from one brand to another brand. And this could be related to technology or some programs that you create about, loyalty, things of that nature, so that as the new companies enter into that market where you are operating, customers won't switch because of these switching costs. An important advantage of first entry is also building volume to take advantage of the experience curve. Experience curve is basically the cost advantages that you incur as you operate in a country for a long period of time. You gain a lot of experience, and that leads to a decrease in the average cost of production. And part of it is the learning by doing. As you've been operating in that country, you learn about their systems, you learn about how to do things much more efficiently, and that helps reducing the cost of production. So that's one benefit of entering into a country early on. But the other advantage is obviously the economies of scale. You've been there for a long period of time, the scale has been large, and that also creates an advantage to you. And that basically also creates an entry barrier for your competitors too. As your per unit costs are lower, your competitors having a higher average per unit cost, they will not be able to compete with you as much because you can go lower in the price while they cannot, because they will incur losses as a result of that. Okay, so why did I say that these questions are related? What's the connection between the which market and when? Suppose it's very important for you to enter into India, then I claim that the when question has been answered. Because if you decide to go to India, the only thing that you have to do is, are my competitors are in this country or not? Basically, there's nothing that you can do about being a first mover or late entrant. The choice has been made for you. But if the other way around, what's important for you is to be a first mover, then you have to separate out markets where your competitors already exist. That means that you should not be entering into those countries. That's the connection between these two questions. Third part of the question is the scale of entry, whether we should enter at a large scale or a small scale. And when you enter at a small scale, the advantage is that you're basically testing the market, and you don't want to, put all of your funds into one market and limit your strategic flexibility. So entering at a small scale will allow you to see if you've made the right choice by entering into a particular market, or if the circumstances change later on, you will have enough funds so that you can also explore other opportunities that may arise later on. But entering at a large scale also comes with a lot of advantages, and it's much easier to attract customers and distributors. You will be able to, they will trust large scale entry companies rather than a company that enters at a small scale that not many people are aware of the brand. It will be much easier for the distributors because you will also have a lot of trust established with the distributors when you have committed large financial resources. And it will also cause a pause in your competitors. When your competitors try to enter into a market where you have large presence, they will think twice about it because you are not easily going to give up that market. As they enter, you will put up a fight against them, and that will make them think twice before they enter into a market. Now, the last benefit that I have over here is basically the connection between when and what scale questions. When you are entering at a large scale, it's much easier to capture the first mover advantages. First mover advantages are associated with large scale entry because we're talking about economies of scale, having long presence over there. So when you are entering at the large scale, when you're entering basically as a first mover, you also have to enter at a large scale. So this is basically the first question that a company considering international business needs to take into account. And before I move on to entry modes, I just want to see if there are any questions on this part of.
I'm not sure if this is completely related, or I think it is. But so you're in Ann Arbor, and I think a lot of people at this workshop are also in Michigan or have some connection to Michigan. I think it would be really great to know about any somewhat local resources in Michigan to connect other entrepreneurs, or a resource where, I don't know, even like a meetup of some kind, because I think everything you're saying is great. But I think sometimes it's a scary thought for a lot of individuals, even business people in America, to think of stepping into the international world. It's unheard of for some people. So for me, what would be very beneficial would be to know of a place or or an organization that really promotes, you know, connectivity between the.
Yep. I have a one slide in the end about that. I'm directing you to chambers of commerce. Usually, wherever you are in the US or in Michigan, the chambers of commerce help you with your export efforts, and also Department of Commerce. I have the link for those in the last slide. And they do help a lot. And I think Department of Commerce charges you a fee for their assistance, but they have a large network of people, international business professionals that operate, because they do deal with basically the consulates in different countries. So they do, consulates, the main goal is to learn about the country. So they're not only learning about the politics and all of that, but they're also learning about the, the benefits that the U.S. businesses can have. So they have, you will have access to large, size information. All right. So
I think Michael has a question as well.
Michael?
Yeah. So recently, my question is there a resource to check what like the lead times through customs are for different ports of entry? Is there a thing for that? I mean, we were dealing with some stuff through China where when they nationalized like 2 Mondays ago, it just put everything, just redlined it. And then we've had products in port in LA through waiting for customs since the 3rd. That we still don't have visibility on. Is there anything that kind of gives lead times of different ports of entry for customs that you're aware of?
I'm not, but I can look for it and I'll let you know. Would that work?
Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right. So in terms of the options for modes of entry, and the easiest one is basically the exporting, and that's how typically a lot of the companies begin their globalization efforts. And it has the advantage in terms of avoiding a number of costs and the risks. Basically, you continue operating in the US, and you actually increase the scale of your operations. That comes with advantages with regard to economies of scale, experience curve. But it may also be the wrong choice if you are facing a lot of pressure to reduce the cost of production, because US may not necessarily offer the favorable factor costs. And exporting also has other disadvantages, such as transportation costs. The transportation costs have come down significantly, but what you are dealing with is especially bulky in terms of large or heavy. This may make the transportation cost significant in the overall pricing of your product. And the tariff rates or threats of tariff. Basically, tariff rates may be high, that's fine, but tariff rates, even if they are low, overnight, the government may decide to increase the tariffs and you will find yourself out of that market. So that's something that you need to take into account as well. But an important disadvantage of exporting is delegation that you do. You do not necessarily market, sell, or service your products in in the other country. The importer company handles all of those things. That means that you have less control over how they operate, which means that those activities that they take part in, marketing, sales, or if they provide poor after-sales service, it's going to have a negative impact on your brand image. So even later, you change your mode of entry from exporting to, let's say, having a physical presence over there, that damage is going to persist. Another problem is divided loyalties of the companies. I always give this example of, I turn 40, I go through the middle age crisis, and I want a convertible Mercedes. I go to that Grand Blanc store, Grand Blanc Motor Cars, and they're not only selling Mercedes, but they're also selling BMW. For them, what's important is to sell one of these cars, right? They're not necessarily loyal to one of the brand names. So if they don't have something what I'm looking for in their lot, they will be selling me another brand, right? It's for them, it doesn't make a difference. But if you think about Mercedes or BMW, these are competitor companies. Basically, you're taking business from one and give it to another one. I have a couple of things over here. One is the export-import data from the World Trade Organization. And when you are exploring whether exporting is the right option or not, you may want to find out how much exporting is occurring. And I'm just going to show you that very quickly. And you can, have very detailed all right. You can have very detailed export-import data. So I search for Comtrade database. That's the name of the database. It's not very user-friendly, so you have to click on number of things multiples of times. Extract data. And there we go. So basically, you choose the year, you choose the reporter, and let me choose US. And we may be interested in Chinese market, let's say, and trade flows, how much we're exporting, and then this is the most detailed data set, though, 6-digit harmonized system commodities, and then you can get the data. It's on the other screen. And the description of the data is basically over here. So you would know how much of what we have exported to various countries. And it's really detailed, like live reptiles that we have. Let me make it bigger. View, zoom. So, it starts with the agriculture sector, but it's a very long list. The poultry, swine, mammals, we export a lot of things to China. It's like the dairy produce, yogurt, whether or not concentrated or containing added sugar or sweetening matter or flavored containing. So it gives you an idea about how much of an export we have been doing to various countries, and has all sorts of industries over here. There's like more than 4,000 product categories here. That's something that you should definitely look into in a particular sector that you're in, how much exports or import has been occurring between two countries. And then the other data source that I have is the tariff data. Again, here you can choose the country and then find out about how much they are protecting their markets, the tariff rates for, let's suppose that we want to do Russian Federation, choose the most current one, and I usually go with all, and select all, and next. Choose Excel.
I've heard Turkey is a really great place for foreigners to buy property.
Yep. They're selling off the countries. Turkey has gone through a lot of trade and investment liberalization. It used to be impossible for foreigners, even if they were born over there, they would not get nationality. Now all of those things have changed. You can get the nationality, you bring in money, they will give you everything. All right. Again, another, economists are good in collecting data, but not very good in website design. So the column that you should be focusing on is this blue one. Basically, this is the tariff rate in percentages. So this is like a 2.7%. This is 3.8%. Make this bigger too. Probably you guys are not able to see it. There we go. So these are the tariff rates of the Russian Federation, is if you're interested in. Then for live horses or live asses, like bovine animals, there's lots of tariff rates that they are charging. And you could be looking for a particular product and then see what the tariff rate is for that particular product. Okay. And like I said, the blue column is what you should be looking at. So I don't think we have a lot of time left, so I'm going to try to go a little bit faster and provide this to Nick so that he can share this with you. And turnkey projects is basically exporting your technology. Not many companies do this. Basically, you need to be in the construction sector or an industry that uses very expensive and complex technology. If you want to build a nuclear, station or suspension bridge, or you're going to build a high rise or things of that nature, that's when you would look into a turnkey project. And licensing and franchising, these are basically the situations where you let another company use your processes, your name, your designs, and you collect money. Especially in an environment where the technology changes a lot, this would be advisable, because basically your business model is more about development of the technology and you license it to others. So they do the operations, but it generates an income stream for you. And advantage is basically, you have a property, you don't want to develop it, or you don't have a capital, you don't want to deal with the cost and the risk associated with foreign country. Basically, you let another company do it. And disadvantage is obviously you're losing your technology. But of course, you could, if you are constantly upgrading your technology, this is not a main concern. And there's also possibility, even if that's not the case, you can get into cross-licensing agreement. Basically, you license your technology in exchange for them licensing your technology, and that reduces the opportunistic behavior of stealing your technology. And then there are some other disadvantages, like you can't move profits from one country to another country, and you do not have control over how they operate over there with regard to manufacturing and marketing or strategy. So these could be concerning. And similar issues with franchising. This happens in the service sector. So the reasons why you would do that is, again, avoiding any risk costs associated with entering into a foreign country. You just want to create revenue for you. So you do open franchises. And disadvantage, the most important one, is basically in licensing, it was losing your technology. In franchising, it's your reputation. The consumers typically expect that, the same quality from franchises, no matter where you are in the world. So you want to really keep a good eye on the quality issues. And a way to basically address that is to open a wholly owned or joint venture in those locations so that they can take a closer look at the issues that may arise. So the remaining slides are basically on foreign direct investment. It's very advisable to enter into a country if you're going to be doing an investment with a partner from that country, because of this main advantage. They do have knowledge of the competitive conditions, the culture, they have connections in those countries. So that will give you an initial advantage to reduce your liability of being foreign in that country. But the disadvantage is you have a partner, so partner owns your technology, partner controls the decisions that you are making, and these may lead to issues later on. So oftentimes, your venture into a foreign country may start as a joint venture, and you benefit this from initial advantage, but the initial advantage is gone after a few years. So you should be trying to take over the partner's share and move into a wholly owned subsidiary. And the main advantage of the wholly owned subsidiary is that you control your technology, you make your own decisions, all of the profit is yours, so the company is yours. And disadvantage is you're bearing all of the costs and the risk because there's no partner to share those costs and the risks. In terms of whether you should start a new company or acquire an existing company, typically the advice is to look for a company to acquire for the same reason, the intangible assets the company comes with. These are the local brand name, local reputation, local connections, and their awareness about the culture and the business issues in that country. But sometimes, well, oftentimes it leads to disappointing results. And part of it is because you are, first of all, overpay for the company that you are buying. And there are various reasons for that one. And most importantly, it's the inadequate pre-acquisition screening. But also there are some issues that may arise later on when you acquire a company in a foreign country. The cultures are different, not only the national cultures, but also organizational cultures are different. So you may fail to fully integrate that a company into your overall organization and not be able to realize the synergies that you were hoping to have. And all of those issues will be resolved if you start the company yourself as a greenfield, but it will make the matters really slow and your profit expectations, market share expectations would be low. So that's basically the general overview of the, I'm sorry, I know that we have only 7 minutes left, so I wanted to give some time for your questions, but going back to Steve's comment, Michigan Economic Development Corporation, obviously, they are really proponents of Michigan companies exporting to different markets. So they have, to help a lot for companies, small or large. And the Department of Commerce Export Assistance Center, and I know the director of this Export Assistance Center, so they do help a lot. I had them a number of times in my classes to talk about the assistance that they are providing, and they help a lot to companies as export as well. So we have about 5 minutes left. I would like to open it for questions.
Yeah, does anybody have a burning question they want to ask?
I have a question. I would like to know, how can we review this again? Is there a website, or how do we get the information?
I am gonna provide this PowerPoint to Nick Custer, and then he can share with the people that are in the workshop right now.
Yep, I'll send it out, and then we'll also have a recording of the conversation session today available on our website.
Yenner, this is Paula.
Hi, Paula.
But I just really want to take a minute to thank you for taking the time to present us with this very valuable information. So I want to make sure before everybody got off the webinar that I personally thanked you for doing this for us.
Thanks, Paula. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. I enjoy talking about this. So, and I haven't had students in my class for a while.
Yenner, just as I guess we can all have this conversation, I noticed that Tamer's also created a webinar about international supply chains. Mm-hmm. And what we're thinking is maybe this would be a kind of a good series, right? Different kinds of international trade and marketing and supply chain topics. Mm-hmm. Do you all want to talk about that and then think about if you think it would be valuable to have some follow-up sessions?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, especially, implications of what we are experiencing right now. It changes a lot. We have seen that we can't completely rely on international supply chains in case of emergencies. And, we, just like Michael was mentioning, the supply chains have been broken, and now every country is on their own, even when they are producing their, the PPEs, they're trying to keep it to themselves. The countries are, having this fight over, plane full of PPEs, and then one country offers more money, and then instead of coming to Germany, they are directed to US. There are lots of things going on. I think there are certain product categories where we, me, Paula, I'm really in favor of international business, but in case of emergencies, there needs to be like a supply of critical material that where the countries can support their population rather than getting into this international competition. I think, Michael, that's what you're trying to address, right?
Yeah, then what you just presented here, I got to thank you quite a bit for. So I'm looking at the PPE markets become commodities and raw materials. So that's one of the big projects I'm working on, is sourcing raw for some federal companies or whatever agencies. And this has definitely been very useful. Thank you so much.
One other thing that I've been reading is, a lot of those that come in do not meet the standards. So even like when we're buying these things, they end up not being used. And the most recent example, I've read the news yesterday that the machines that we have that will help you, breathe, that came in from Russia, they ended up not being used at all. So it's a huge waste of money. So when you're buying products from other countries, you just need to make sure that they meet your standards. They may be suitable for their own markets, and if that country is not really considering selling their products at the international markets, they're just gonna meet their own standards, and without really checking whether they meet your standards or not, you should not just go ahead and, okay, they're selling these machinery, let's buy it, and then you buy them and spend millions, and then you basically bought some junk that you can't use because it doesn't meet your standards. So,
and Yenner, we've actually come up with something for that. I have a paramilitary group that it's kind of expensive, but it's cheaper than getting just bunk goods to the States, where we send them on the ground to do a certain level of quality assurance. And then when it makes it stateside, for like the masks, for example, we have Ator Labs out of Panama City in Florida that does the NIOSH certifications, and then Nelson Labs has just got a backlog like you wouldn't believe. But in order to import anything and sell it in the United States, you have to have those control measures. Otherwise, you're just going to get scooped up by some federal agency, and that's been a big hassle when dealing with the international community lately.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? I just want to really reiterate how grateful we are for you putting on this session for us. We got a lot of great information today. And thank you everyone for joining us. If you are interested in using any of the services available to you at no cost through the University of Michigan's Innovation Incubator, I'll put that web address in the text box in the chat so that you guys can get that. Or if you have any follow-up questions, something that comes up later, feel free to send that to me directly. I'll put my email in there as well, and I can forward that on to Yenner. With that, I think we'll probably end the session. And again, just thank you guys for joining us today.
Thanks everyone for showing up. It was good to see some of my former students too. So take care.
Thank you very much for this presentation, Dr. Yenner.
Thank you.
And just make sure I do have your email. If I don't, I'm going to put, again, my email address here in the chat, and we'll get you the copy of the presentation today. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.